All right. Hi, folks. Today we have an awesome panel of speakers who are going to help us learn about what healthcare professionals should know about sex workers. So I am your moderator, Beth Montalvo, and we also are grateful to have with us Miranda Fair, who is a public health official. We have Miranda Jensen, who is a current PhD student studying public health. And we have our expert, Dr. Erin McDonald. She's an MD, PhD, specializing in vulnerable populations. So today we are going to cover the U.S. population of sex workers. We're going to talk about health issues and barriers that they face, and then organizations that already exist to help them. And we're going to hear more from Dr. Erin about what we can do as healthcare professionals to improve and help out this population. And then we're going to have an open Q&A for our audience members to be able to ask our panel some questions. So we asked our audience how many people they believe are sex workers in the US, and the majority of them said 1 to 2 million. We also have another poll that was asking about if they believe sex work should be decriminalized, and this was pretty split. So 47.1% said yes, it should be decriminalized. And then we also asked about the barriers that you believe this population faces. And the majority of you said stigma. So we are excited to learn more from our speakers today.
Thanks, Erin. As she said, I'm Miranda, and I'm a grad student studying public health. And really quick, I'm just going to give you a background profile on a sex worker here in the United States. So Anne Marie grew up in an abusive household. And when she was about 14 years old, she had decided she had enough and she wanted to leave. And being 14, she clearly didn't have any money or resources. So that left her homeless until she found an older friend named Rachel, who's about 25, who introduced her to the world of sex work. Together, they faced a lot of trials, and anywhere from abuse from their customers to abuse from veteran sex workers on the streets who were worried about them imposing on their business. So finally, after a few years, Anne Marie was able to get out of the sex work industry, but it did cause her a lot of trials.
Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit about who is included in this sex worker population. So sex workers is just an umbrella term. It includes prostitutes, escorts, strippers, etc. And we wanted to clarify in this presentation that an FSSW, which is the term we are going to be using, is a full service sex worker, and it is not the same as human trafficking, because sex trafficking, human trafficking is a violation of human rights, whereas FSSW is not. So FSSWs in the United States, there is an estimate of 1 to 2 million FSSW in the United States, which the poll showed our audience got correct. But it is estimated that this is an underestimation because of the nature of sex work, and the sex workers don't want to disclose this occupation. In the United States, Nevada is the only state where sex work is legal, but only under very specific circumstances. And in Nevada, there are 21 licensed brothels. Also, I wanted to touch on some health issues that this population faces. Some of these health issues are sexual violence, police and other institutionalized violence and discrimination, including police rape, HIV and other STIs, which is usually the first thing people think of as a health issue with sex workers. But I wanted to focus a little on the mental health disorders. So in this population, all of PTSD, anxiety, and depression were found to be higher in FSSWs than in the general population. Just for example, PTSD was up to 13% in the FSSW population, while in a general population, they found it was only 3.6%.
And concerning some of the obstacles and barriers that sex workers face, 59% of sex workers reported that they do not feel comfortable disclosing their profession to their closest friends or family, while 49% reported that this stigma is definitely a barrier to their ability to access healthcare. They also feel uncomfortable disclosing work-related violence, trauma, and concerns to their providers for fear of punishment by law or discrimination. And this stigma and discomfort ultimately leads to a major lack of data on this population and information on what we can fix within our healthcare system to better serve them. Additionally, sex workers often face things like homelessness and have a history of drug abuse. As a consequence of their lack of permanent residence or access to things like Wi-Fi, it's super difficult for them to fill out intake forms. And some sex workers also report that poverty is a huge barrier for them because they can't afford basic routine appointments. Some also report the lack of insurance, which causes them to be limited to the amount of doctor's offices that they can go to, or to be limited by what services they are able to pay for.
Great. Thank you. And now we are going to hear a little bit about
Make space.
actions that we can take as healthcare professionals. So let me just stop the share. We are going to speak to our expert, Dr. Erin McDonald. So our first question for you is, what actions do you believe healthcare professionals can take to be able to serve this population?
There's a lot that healthcare professionals can do. I would say the number one thing is educating themselves, training the healthcare professionals in order to provide the most non-judgmental, confidential care. They should be able to respect the privacy and autonomy of sex workers in order to build trust so that they come back so they feel comfortable and safe in receiving the care that they need, and to make sure to address the stigma and discrimination directly and to squash that out whenever they see it.
Amazing. Yeah. And what resources are currently available to sex workers?
There are actually a lot of resources available. The problem is a lot of healthcare professionals don't know what they are, and they're not able to give them to the sex workers when they need them. So the resources they should know about and be able to offer them are community resources like housing, domestic violence shelters, mental health services, which is something Miranda Fair talked about, substance abuse programs, and other social services that are available for them.
Awesome. Yeah. And then what risk factors do you believe that healthcare professionals and doctors should be able to look out for this population?
Great question. I actually prepared a slide. Let me pop that up for you guys, because there are 5 main risk factors that healthcare professionals should be aware of in order to provide the best care for this population. So one of the first ones that we want to look out for is STIs. So due to the high risk behaviors that sex workers do partake in, like multiple partners, unprotected sex, you want to look out for those STIs. Unwanted pregnancies is also a big one. Lack of access to birth control and reproductive health care can lead to those things. You also want to look out for violence, because they are a vulnerable population. They often unfortunately encounter a lot of physical and sexual violence, so looking out for those things. Another thing is substance abuse. So substance abuse can be a coping mechanism for some sex workers. Other sex workers turn to sex work in order to continue their substance use. So that can lead to addiction and other serious health problems. And then the last one is exploitation and trafficking. Sex workers are particularly vulnerable in illegal and unregulated settings. So those are the things that you're going to want to look out for sure.
Awesome. Thank you for going over that with us. And now we are going to hear from a sex worker. She had a TED Talk, and she's kind of talking a little bit about what, from a point of view from a sex worker, what she believes can help them out. So.
Make space for us in your movements. That means not only listening to sex workers when we speak, but amplifying our voices. Resist those who silence us, those who say that a prostitute is either too victimized, too damaged to know what's best for herself, or else too privileged and too removed from real hardship, not representative of the millions of voiceless victims. This distinction between victim and empowered is imaginary. It exists purely to discredit sex workers and make it easy to ignore us. No doubt many of you work for a living. Well, sex work is work too. Just like you, some of us like our jobs, some of us hate them. Ultimately, most of us have mixed feelings. But how we feel about our work isn't the point. And how others feel about our work certainly isn't. What's important is that we have the right to work safely and on our own terms.
Great.
Okay, so I wanted to highlight some of the successes that have been seen to bridge the gap. In Sweden, they created a partial decriminalization of sex work, and the success was found in the increased amount of reports that involved violence in the workplace for FSSWs, and over time, the violence towards FSSWs decreased. Another one was in Chicago. It was a 6-month study that followed 3 clinics that provided services to sex workers. Each month, the clinics tried a different approach and found that the best way to serve the community was to give each patient the same intake form that contained risk-based questions. These forms help doctors find patients with STIs and increase the amount of wellness visits each sex worker had per year.
Awesome.
Okay, so now that we've learned about sex workers, what are some organizations that are out there that can help support them? So since we're in Utah, first I want to talk about the Utah AIDS Foundation. They are a foundation that gives at-home testing options for things like HIV and STIs. And they also have an HIV and STI hotline that people can call into anonymously and ask questions about symptoms that they're experiencing. And they also have case management and support. And then the other organization I want to talk about is the Sex Worker Outreach Program. It's called SWAP USA, and they have chapters across the country and also one here in Salt Lake City. And they have a community support line where past sex workers, current sex workers operate the line, and anyone who needs support or help can call in. They also do a lot of advocacy things to help raise awareness, and they are trying to help decriminalize sex work across the nation.
Thank you. Okay, and so now we're going to open up the chat just so that our viewers can ask us some questions. All right, and it looks like we have a question here. So I believe this question is for Erin. So what is a way that healthcare providers can improve the overall quality of life for a full service sex worker?
Great question. I think the most important thing that healthcare professionals can do and healthcare providers can do is be advocates for this population, advocate for laws and policies that support them, increase access to healthcare and decriminalize sex work.
Great, yeah, and it looks like we have a few more questions. So why would someone choose to go into sex work in the first place is what one of our audience members wants to know.
Okay, so I'll take this one, kind of going back to the profile that I introduced at the beginning. There's lots of factors, but things like homelessness, lack of money, lack of resources, usually it's kind of a necessity. They're in dire circumstances where they need to go into sex work.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And then we also have a question, Miranda P, this is for you. So what is the specific circumstance where sex work is legal in Nevada?
Okay, yeah, so in Nevada, you can, sex work is legal only in a licensed house of prostitution and never with or for a minor.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you. Thanks for your questions, everybody. We actually have a few questions for you now, and don't worry, we will tell you the answers for them. So what is one vulnerability that a sex worker might experience? And I'll give you some time to think. And the answer for this can vary, obviously, but it's the lack of insurance, homelessness, or possibly violence, substance abuse. There's this population really is very vulnerable, and so we have that. Second question for you is, how many sex workers are in the U.S.? And most of you got it right at the beginning, actually, before we even had our webinar. So 1 to 2 million estimated in the U.S., but of course we don't really know, and there's a big lack of data there, but that's what is estimated. And then which state has legal brothels? So like Miranda Fair was just speaking about, we know that the US state that has legal brothels is Nevada. And then our last question is, what is one way that SWAP USA helps sex workers across the United States? And this one should be kind of fresh on your mind. So Miranda Jensen was talking to us about that, our grad student. She was letting us know they provide community support and advocacy workers for FSSW and have a nationwide effort to decriminalize sex work. And that is all we have for you today. We appreciate you for being here and watching this webinar, and hope you have a great day.